Yeah, let's take a look at
Are
it.
you lost? The video game store is across the street. The voice was a lazy drawl, thick with boredom
this way.
and a casual, unthinking
Yeah, let's take a look at it.
condescension. The salesman, a man in his late 20s with thinning hair and the soft, pale look of someone
Right this
who
way.
spent too much time indoors, didn't even bother to look up from the glowing screen of his computer. The words floated over the polished glass countertop, across the hushed, reverent silence of the store, and landed on Kevin Williams like a physical weight. Kevin, who was only 15 years old, stood just inside the heavy glass door of Arsenal Premium, the most exclusive and most expensive gun shop in town. He never imagined that a simple visit, a quiet quest for information, would become the catalyst for a turnaround that would leave the entire complacent town utterly speechless. He was dressed in clean but faded jeans, a plain gray t-shirt and a pair of well-worn sneakers. In this temple of tactical gear and high-pressed steel, he looked completely, and to the occupants, offensively, out of place. The air inside was cool and still, smelling of expensive gun oil, polished wood, and the faint, metallic temps of money. All around him, gleaming display cases held a curated collection of collector's weapons, antique firearms, and state-of-the-art military equipment. Items that cost more than most cars, some more than a down payment on a house. It was a world away from the quiet, modest subdivision where he lived. Actually, Kevin replied, his voice a marvel of control, a calm, quiet sound that contrasted sharply with his youthful appearance. I'm looking for some information on carry permits. The salesman's laughter was a short, sharp, ugly bark of a sound. It echoed in the quiet, cathedral-like space, attracting the attention of the other employees, who turned to stare, their faces a mixture of curiosity and amusement. Permits, the salesman scoffed, finally looking up, his eyes sweeping over Kevin with a look of open, undisguised disdain. Kid, you can't even drive yet. Now, go on, go play outside before I have to call the police for trespassing. The manager, a burly, imposing man named Rick Patterson, emerged from a back office, drawn by the sound of the laughter. He had a florid, perpetually irritated face and a condescending smile that he seemed to wear like a uniform at 52. Patterson had built his reputation and his considerable fortune on a simple, unspoken principle. He knew who to talk to, and he knew who to keep out. His store catered exclusively to a select and carefully vetted clientele, wealthy businessmen, powerful local politicians, and serious collectors with deep pockets and the right social connections. What's going on out here? Patterson's voice was a low, gravelly rumble. He eyed Kevin up and down, his gaze lingering on the boy's worn sneakers, his plain t-shirt, his dark skin. It was not an assessment of a customer, it was an assessment of a threat. Son, he said, the word a calculated insult. This isn't the kind of store for people like you. We have very high-value merchandise in here. We can't have just anyone wandering in off the street. Kevin stood motionless, his heart pounding a slow, steady, controlled rhythm in his chest. His eyes, calm and observant, scanned the impressive collection of weapons displayed on the walls behind the counter. There was something about his posture, a quiet, almost unnatural serenity for someone his age, a stillness that should have served as a warning. But Patterson and his employees were too busy, too comfortable, too deeply immersed in feeding their own prejudices to notice. I understand perfectly well where I am, sir, Kevin replied, his voice remaining quiet, respectful, but with an underlying firmness that was impossible to ignore. My father always said that knowledge has no age and no address. The mention of his father made Patterson roll his eyes, a theatrical, dismissive gesture. Sure, he said, turning to share a knowing, conspiratorial look with the salesman. And let me guess, your father is a big-time collector, right? You guys always make up these stories. What Patterson didn't know, what he couldn't possibly comprehend, was that every cruel, dismissive word, every look of cold, arrogant contempt, was being meticulously, forensically recorded in the memory of a young man who had learned, far too early in his life, that true strength is not manifested in shouting or in confrontation, but in the quiet, strategic patience of those who know how to wait for the perfect and most devastating moment to act. A regular customer, a portly, self-important local lawyer named Morrison, who had been examining a high-end scope, let out a loud, braying laugh. Rick, he called out, his voice full of a smug, clubby amusement, you should put a sign on the door, serious people only, that would avoid these awkward situations. Kevin nodded politely, his expression unreadable. Thank you for the suggestion, sir, he said. I'll make a note of it. The phrase sounded innocent, almost naive, a statement of defeat. But if anyone in that room had bothered to look closely, to look past the boy's simple clothes and his young face, they might have noticed a determined, intelligent gleam in his eyes. It was the kind of determination that only exists in those who carry a purpose, a mission, far greater than their age would suggest. They might have realized that these were not the words of a cowed, humiliated teenager. They were the words of someone who was just beginning to play a game far more complex, and with far higher stakes, than anyone in that store could possibly imagine. "Did you write everything down?" Patterson laughed loudly, shaking his head at the other customers, who were now all watching the unfolding drama with a mixture of amusement and mild discomfort. "Kid, you probably can't even read the technical specifications on these weapons. Now, go on home and play soldier before I really lose my patience." Kevin's gaze remained fixed on the wall of handguns behind the counter. His eyes, which had been scanning the entire collection, now settled on a specific pistol. "A Glock 17. That one," he said calmly, pointing a steady finger. "It has a modified tactical sighting system, and a custom stippled grip. It's the military version, right? The 17M." The silence that followed lasted for 3 long, uncomfortable seconds. It was broken by Patterson, who burst out laughing again, a loud, forced sound that was meant to cover his own momentary surprise. "Military version," he roared, turning to his audience. "Did you hear that? The kid's been watching too many action movies." Morrison, the lawyer, clearly enjoying the public humiliation, approached Kevin, his face a mask of condescending, paternalistic concern. He leaned in close, his voice a low, conspiratorial whisper. "Son," he said, his breath smelling of coffee and self-satisfaction, "guns aren't toys. This is serious stuff, for serious people, people who work for a living, who pay taxes, who contribute to society." "I understand perfectly, sir," Kevin replied, his voice remaining as calm, as steady, as it had been from the beginning. The sheer unshakable nature of his composure was beginning to unnerve some of the people present. "My father always talked about the responsibility that comes with handling firearms." "Ah, yes, your father," Patterson said, raising his eyebrows, exchanging another meaningful, mocking glance with Morrison. "And what, exactly, does your father do? Is he a security guard at the mall?" The question was accompanied by a fresh wave of muffled, sycophantic chuckles from the other customers. Kevin lowered his head slightly, but it was not a gesture of shame. It was the same gesture he used to make as a small child, standing next to his father in his crisp, decorated dress uniform, watching as other veterans, men who had sacrificed so much, were disrespected at official ceremonies by smooth-faced politicians and wealthy businessmen who would never, ever, understand the true weight, the true cost, of serving their country. Colonel James Williams had taught his son many things. He had taught him how to shoot, how to navigate by the stars, how to survive in the wilderness. But the most important lessons had not been about physical survival. They had been about the survival of the soul, of one's honor. He had taught his son that there are battles that are won with courage and with honor, and there are other battles, the more insidious, more difficult ones, that are won with strategic, and often painful, patience. During his 23 years of distinguished military service, James Williams had faced 3 wars. He had commanded troops in the deserts of Iraq, in the mountains of Afghanistan, and in a dozen other classified unnamed hellholes around the world. And he had always returned home with the same unwavering philosophy, a philosophy he had drilled into his son from the time he was old enough to understand. "Kevin," he would say, his voice a low, gentle rumble, "true strength isn't about proving to everyone that you're strong. It's not about shouting or fighting or puffing out your chest. It's about knowing, deep down in your own heart, what you are capable of. And it's about having the wisdom and the discipline to know when and how to use that strength." James Williams had died 6 months earlier, not in a blaze of glory on a foreign battlefield, but on an international humanitarian mission, killed by a roadside bomb while delivering medical supplies to a remote village. He had left his wife, Sarah, and his son, Kevin, with a modest military pension, a house full of memories, and a legacy of honor and service that most people like Rick Patterson, could never, ever, hope to understand. In his father's old, locked desk drawer, Kevin had found the tangible proof of that legacy: letters from 4-star generals, framed photographs of his father with 2 different presidents, and a collection of medals: a Purple Heart, a Bronze, Star, a distinguished service cross that told the story of a life lived in service to a cause greater than himself. He worked in security, Kevin replied, his voice quiet. The statement was technically correct. It just omitted the fact that it was international national security. Sure he did, Patterson said, his voice a dismissive, sneering wave of his hand. Always the same story. You guys always make up these important-sounding professions to try and impress people. A new customer entered the store, the bell on the door chiming softly. He was a large, imposing man dressed in expensive, tailored clothes. A man who was clearly accustomed to having his words and his presence respected. Patterson's entire demeanor changed in an instant. He straightened up, his condescending smile replaced by a fawning, servile one. "Mr. Thompson," he said, his voice now a smooth, obsequious purr. "It's good to see you again, Sir Thompson." A man who was clearly one of the store's most important clients barely acknowledged him. His eyes, cold and hard, were fixed on Kevin, his expression one of open, undisguised irritation. "Rick," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl, "what is this situation? I thought you kept this establishment." "I was just taking care of that, Mr. Thompson," Patterson said, shooting a venomous glare at Kevin. The boy was just on his way out. Kevin stood motionless, his eyes moving calmly, deliberately, between the faces that were now staring at him with a new and more palpable hostility. There was something about his posture, a quiet, centered stillness that was so at odds with his age, that should have alerted these men that they were dealing with something far outside their limited, prejudiced experience. But they were too busy, too consumed, with feeding their own sense of superiority, of belonging. "Actually," Kevin said softly, his voice cutting through the tense, charged silence, "I still have some questions about the legal requirements for carry permits for emancipated minors." The statement hit the conversation like a small, precisely targeted bomb. Morrison, the lawyer, let out a nervous, incredulous laugh. "Emancipated minor?" he scoffed. "Kid, you don't look old enough to drive, let alone carry a gun. What kind of nonsense are you talking about?" "I am 15 years old," Kevin replied, with that same, unnatural, and deeply unnerving, calm. "And I was legally emancipated by a federal court 3 months ago. I need to understand the legal procedures for someone in my specific situation." Thompson, the powerful new customer, frowned, his bushy eyebrows knitting together in a look of deep, suspicious confusion. "Emancipated? And your parents just agreed to that?" "My father died in the line of duty," Kevin said, his voice flat, devoid of any self-pity. "My mother supported the decision." The mention of his father's death created a brief, uncomfortable moment of silence. But Patterson, eager to reassert his authority, and to impress his wealthy client, quickly resumed his hostile attitude. "Look, kid," he said, his voice a low, threatening growl. "I don't know what kind of story you're making up, what kind of legal games you're trying to play, but this isn't the place for it. This is a serious business, for serious men." Kevin nodded, his expression still one of polite, respectful inquiry. "That's why I'm here, sir," he said. "I want to do everything the right way, the legal way." "The right thing," Thompson laughed, a bitter, humorless sound, "would be for you to be in school, where you belong, not disturbing legitimate business establishments with your legal fantasies." What none of these men, in their blind, arrogant certainty, knew, was that Kevin had spent the last 6 months doing much more than just grieving for his father. He had been studying. He had been meticulously, obsessively, studying state and federal gun laws, legal procedures, and the complex web of regulations that governed the sale and ownership of firearms. He was not doing this out of some teenage action movie whimsy. He was doing it because he had inherited more than just his father's medals, more than just his quiet strength. He had also inherited his father's profound, unshakable sense of justice, a sense of justice that would not, could not, tolerate being underestimated or humiliated without consequences. In the simple, worn school backpack he carried, which everyone in that room assumed contained nothing more than textbooks and homework, Kevin kept a neatly organized folder. Inside that folder were certified copies of his emancipation papers, signed by a federal judge. There was official correspondence from the Department of Defense regarding his father's military pension and survivor benefits, and there was a personal letter of recommendation, written on official letterhead, signed by a 3-star general who had known and served with James Williams for over a decade. More importantly, Kevin had, with a quiet, methodical precision that his father would have been proud of, carefully documented every single discriminatory interaction he had faced in the 6 painful months since his father's death. Every prejudiced comment, every closed door, every look of condescending, pitying contempt had been recorded, dated, and detailed with a military precision his father had taught him. "I understand that you have your doubts," Kevin said calmly, adjusting the strap of his backpack. "Perhaps I should come back another time, with the proper documentation." Patterson laughed one last time, a final, triumphant, dismissive sound. "Documentation," he sneered. "Sure, kid, you do that. Come back when you're old enough to have these kinds of conversations." Kevin nodded politely and headed for the door, but he stopped halfway, his hand on the cool brass handle. He turned around. "Mr. Patterson," he said, his voice still quiet, still respectful. "Can I ask you a personal question?" "What?" Patterson replied, his face still flushed with his easy, cruel victory. "Did you ever serve in the armed forces?" The question, so simple, so direct, caught Patterson completely off guard. He flushed, a dark ugly red creeping up his neck. "I know I never did." "Why?" Kevin nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful, as if he were processing a final, important piece of information. "Just curious," he said. "My dad always said you could tell who had served and who hadn't by the way they treated other people." The observation sounded innocent, almost philosophical, but there was something in Kevin's tone, a quiet, profound certainty, a weight of lived experience that was far beyond his years, that made Patterson feel an inexplicable and deeply unpleasant discomfort. It was as if he had just been weighed and measured and found wanting. It was as if he had just failed a test that he didn't even know he was taking. Every cruel word, every contemptuous laugh, every condescending, dismissive glance had been recorded, not just on a hidden device, but in the sharp, analytical memory of a young man who had learned, from the very best, that the real battle does not take place at the moment of provocation. It takes place in the silent, meticulous, and disciplined preparation that precedes the final and inevitable victory. What those men couldn't see, what their prejudice made them blind to, was the reality that stood before them. Behind the calm, watchful eyes of a 15-year-old teenager was the fierce, unyielding determination of a warrior, a determination that had been forged in the steel of a military education, and had been tempered by the fire and the pain of a recent, profound loss, a loss that had turned a boy into something far more formidable and far more dangerous than any of them could possibly imagine. Kevin left Arsenal Premium without any outward sign of haste or distress, but his mind was already operating 3, 4, 5 steps ahead. In the relative anonymity of the parking lot, he sat in the driver's seat of his second-hand Honda Civic, a 16th birthday gift from his mother, and took out his cell phone. He scrolled through his contacts and dialed a number he hadn't used in months. "Captain Rodriguez," he said, his voice steady. "This is Kevin Williams, Colonel James Williams's son." On the other end of the line, the aged but still steady voice of the veteran who had served as his father's second-in-command for 8 long, difficult years answered immediately, without a hint of hesitation. "Kevin, how are you, kid? My God, I still can't believe we lost James. The world is a lesser place without him." "I'm doing okay, sir," Kevin replied, the familiar honorific, "a small comfort. I need to ask for a favor. It's related to a legal situation. Do you still have any contacts at the Department of Licensing and Regulation?" Captain Rodriguez hesitated, but only for a second. "Of course, son, for you. Anything. What do you need?" Kevin quickly, and dispassionately, explained the situation that had just unfolded at Arsenal Premium. He omitted the most painful, most personal details of the humiliation, focusing instead, with a strategic precision, on the potential legal and regulatory irregularities he had observed during his brief, hostile visit. "Interesting," Rodriguez muttered on the other end of the line, his voice now a low, thoughtful growl. "You know, your father, he taught me to always check the licenses, the permits, of any establishment we visited. A military habit, he called it. A way of assessing the discipline of a place, and coincidentally, I've had some concerns about Arsenal Premium for a few months now. Rumors of some shady dealings." While Kevin was in the parking lot, methodically setting the wheels of justice in motion, inside the store, Rick Patterson was celebrating what he and his cronies considered an easy and deeply satisfying victory. "Did you see the look on that kid's face? The way he ran out of here with his tail between his legs?" Patterson laughed loudly as he lovingly polished a collector's rifle with a soft, clean cloth. "These people, They need to be taught a lesson. They need to learn that there are appropriate places for everyone. Thompson, the wealthy customer, nodded his enthusiastic approval. Exactly, he said, his voice a low, self-satisfied rumble. If we start allowing just anyone to wander in here, it lowers the tone. Our select clientele will start looking elsewhere. Morrison, the lawyer, ever the astute, if morally bankrupt, observer, raised a skeptical eyebrow. Didn't you find it a little strange though, he asked, the way the boy mentioned emancipation, and those specific technical questions, about licenses? It was unusual. Oh please, Patterson dismissed with a contemptuous wave of his hand. These kids, they watch too much YouTube, they read a few articles online, and they think they're legal experts. He probably doesn't even know that a legal emancipation for a minor requires the approval of a federal judge. What Patterson, in his smug, willful ignorance, didn't know, was that Kevin not only knew this, but he had personally gone through the entire, complex, and emotionally draining process just 3 months earlier. After Colonel Williams had died, his mother, Sarah Williams, a registered nurse with a quiet strength that was every bit as formidable as her husband's, had insisted on the emancipation. It was a practical, strategic decision, designed to allow her son to directly access the substantial military benefits he was entitled to, and to make legal decisions related to his father's complex military estate. Federal Judge Harrison, a decorated Vietnam veteran and a personal, lifelong friend of Colonel Williams, had reviewed James's extensive military record, had read the glowing letters of recommendation from his commanding officers, had seen Kevin's exceptional academic achievements, and had processed the emancipation in record time. Captain Rodriguez, Kevin continued, his voice still calm and focused on the phone. Could you do me a favor and check to see if Arsenal Premium is in full compliance with all federal protocols, especially the ones related to non-discrimination in customer service and the proper verification of customer documentation? Kid, I can do better than that, Rodriguez said, his voice now full of a cold, hard anger. Your father saved my life. On 2 separate, and very ugly, occasions. I owe him a debt I can never repay. But I can sure as hell start by making a phone call to a very good friend of mine at the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. If there is any impropriety, any illegality, happening at that store, trust me, we will find it inside Arsenal Premium. Patterson was now bragging to a growing group of his regular sycophantic customers about how he had put the kid in his place. The problem with the world today, Patterson declared, his voice full of a pompous, self-aggrandizing authority, as he proudly polished a custom gold-plated pistol, is that these young people, they don't understand hierarchy, don't understand respect. In my day, you respected your superiors. Speaking of superiors, Morrison interjected, his voice full of a sly, malicious humor. The kid asked if you had ever served in the military, didn't he, Rick? What was your answer to that? Again, Patterson blushed, a dark, ugly red, creeping up his thick neck. The truth was, he had tried to enlist in the army 3 times during his youth, and had been rejected each time for a series of minor, but disqualifying, health reasons, a fact he had never admitted to anyone, not even his wife. I served my country in other ways, he blustered, his voice a little too loud. Not every patriot has to take up arms. Thompson laughed, a short, sharp, cruel sound. Sure, Rick, he said. You serve your country by selling guns, to those of us who really know how to use them. The joke drew a fresh wave of general, appreciative laughter, but it created a subtle, and deeply unpleasant, discomfort in Patterson. There was something about the way Kevin had asked that question, an apparent, almost childlike, innocence that had seemed to carry a much greater and much heavier weight. Meanwhile, Kevin drove home in his Honda Civic. In the quiet solitude of the garage he opened a heavy metal footlocker, a box that held his father's most important, most precious, belongings. Among the neatly folded dress uniforms, the faded photographs, the stacks of old letters, he found what he was looking for, a letter of recommendation, written on the official letterhead of the Department of Defense, and signed by General Mitchell Roberts, the 4-star general who had been the commander of the humanitarian operation where James Williams had died. Colonel Williams demonstrated exceptional leadership and unparalleled courage under the most extreme pressure, the letter read. His son, Kevin, who demonstrates a similar maturity, a similar integrity, and a similar set of core principles, has my full and unconditional support for any and all of his future endeavors. Kevin took a high-resolution photograph of the letter with his phone and sent it, along with scanned copies of his emancipation papers and his most recent academic certificates. To Captain Rodriguez, it was not an act of arrogance. It was, as his father had taught him, simply an act of preparation. "Always have your paperwork in order, son," James used to say, his voice a low, gentle rumble. "The well-documented truth is the most powerful, and the most unassailable weapon there is." His phone rang. It was Rodriguez. "Kevin," he said, his voice now full of a grim, satisfied energy. "I just got off the phone with my contact at the ATF. Her name is Agent Chen, and she is very, very interested in paying a routine visit to Arsenal Premium tomorrow morning. And son, when she heard that you were Colonel Williams's boy, she became very, very interested in hearing your side of the story." "Thank you, Captain," Kevin said, "but I want to do this the right way. No special treatment because of who my father was." Rodriguez laughed, a warm, appreciative sound. "Boy, you are just like your father, stubborn as a mule, and twice as honorable. But let me tell you something your father taught me. Sometimes, doing things the right way means using all of the legal and personal resources at your disposal. And your father, he made a lot of very good friends, in a lot of very important places." Kevin hung up the phone and looked at the framed photograph of his father that sat on his desk. In it, James Williams, in his full military dress uniform, stared directly at the camera with the same calm, steady, determined expression that Kevin had worn in the store just an hour before in the kitchen. His mother, Sarah, was preparing dinner. She was still in her nurse's uniform, having just returned from a grueling 12-hour shift at the local hospital. "How did it go at the gun store?" she asked, her back to him, her voice tired but full of a quiet, maternal concern. "Educational," Kevin replied simply, **. Sarah stopped stirring the food in the pot and turned to look at her son. She had worked in emergency rooms long enough to recognize that particular tone in a person's voice. It was the calm before the storm. "Kevin," she said, her eyes searching his, "your father always said that the best revenge is to live well and to do the right thing. Don't let yourself become bitter because of ignorant, small-minded people." "I don't intend to become bitter, Mum," he replied, his voice quiet but firm. "But I also don't intend to let them get away with treating other young people the way they treated me today." Sarah nodded slowly, a small, proud smile touching her lips. There was something in her son's eyes, a fierce, unyielding determination that he had inherited directly from his father, that told her this situation was far from over. Outside, on the quiet tree-lined street, a dark, unmarked car with official government license plates drove slowly past their house. The occupant, a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, was checking addresses on a clipboard. At Arsenal Premium, Rick Patterson was ending his day, counting the money in the cash register, completely, blissfully, unaware that every single cruel, dismissive word he had spoken just a few hours earlier had set in motion a series of events that would change his life, and the lives of everyone involved forever. As he carefully put away his father's medals back into their velvet-lined boxes, Kevin reflected on the difference between justice and revenge. One, he knew, was emotional, impulsive, and often, ultimately, unsatisfying. The other was calculated, methodical, and inevitable. And thanks to the life lessons of a decorated and deeply loved colonel, and the quiet, unwavering support of a mother who had raised a son to make a difference in the world, Kevin knew exactly which path he was going to choose. Tomorrow were going to be a very, very interesting day at Arsenal Premium, and Rick Patterson was finally, and painfully, about to discover that there are very real, and very severe, consequences for those who foolishly, and fatally, confuse dignity with weakness, and respect with fear. The next morning, Rick Patterson arrived at Arsenal Premium at 8 a.m. sharp, just as he had done every single day for the past 15 years. He unlocked the heavy glass door, put on his custom, black polo shirt with the store's gold-embroidered logo on it, checked the cash register, and powered up the sophisticated, state-of-the-art security system. He was completely, blissfully, oblivious to the dark, unmarked sedan that was parked across the street, its tinted windows hiding the woman who sat inside, watching his every move. Federal Agent Lisa Chen, a 10-year veteran of the ATF, watched Patterson's routine, her expression, .com/professional, and unreadable. She had a folder of documents on the passenger seat beside her. She had conducted hundreds of these kinds of inspections in her career, but this one, she knew, was special. The name Colonel James Williams, she had discovered, opened doors, and commanded a level of respect in circles that most people didn't even know existed. At exactly 9:15 a.m., Agent Chen crossed the street, her steps purposeful, her posture radiating a quiet, no-nonsense authority. The bell on the store's door chimed softly, announcing her entrance. Patterson looked up from his computer, his automatic, practiced, businessman's smile already in place. "Good morning," he said, his voice a smooth, welcoming purr. "Can I help you today?" Agent Chen did not smile back. She presented her federal ID, her movements crisp and efficient. "Agent Chen ATF," she said, her voice cool and professional. "I'm here to conduct a routine inspection to verify your compliance with all federal regulations." Patterson's practiced smile vanished instantly, as if it had been wiped clean from his face. "An inspection?" He stammered, his voice suddenly a few octaves higher than usual. But we just passed our last audit 2 years ago. Inspections can, and do, occur at any time, Mr. Patterson," Agent Chen replied, her eyes scanning the store, taking in every detail. "I'll need to see all of your sales records for the past 12 months, your current federal firearms license, and your documented customer service protocols." Morrison, the lawyer who had just arrived to buy a new box of ammunition, witnessed the exchange and immediately whispered, his voice a nervous hiss, "Rick, what the hell is going on?" Patterson, trying desperately to maintain his composure, to project an air of calm control, could not stop his hands from trembling slightly as he reached under the counter to retrieve the thick, heavy binder that contained his licenses and permits. "Of course, Agent," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. "We have everything in order here. Perfectly in order." Agent Chen began to methodically, silently, examine the documents, making a series of small, neat notes on the clipboard she was carrying. "I have also received a report," she said, without looking up, "about a possible pattern of discrimination in your customer service practices. Do you have specific written protocols for ensuring that all of your customers are treated equally, regardless of their age, race, or appearance?" "Discrimination?" Patterson forced a nervous, incredulous laugh. "Absolutely not. We treat all of our customers, all of them, with the exact same level of respect." "Interesting," Agent Chen said, her voice flat, devoid of any emotion. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a small, sleek, digital recorder. "Then, you wouldn't mind if I played back some audio recordings that were made, in this very store, just yesterday?" Patterson's blood ran cold. Morrison, the lawyer, took a sudden, involuntary step back, his face a mask of dawning horror. He developed an immediate and intense interest in examining the collection of hunting knives on the far wall. "KevinsClear.com, young voice echoed from the recorder. "Actually, I'm looking for some information on carry permits." It was followed a second later by the sound of Patterson's own cruel, braying laughter. "Permits? Kid, you can't even drive yet. Go play outside before I have to call the police for trespassing." Agent Chen paused the recording. She looked up at Patterson, her eyes cold and hard as steel. "Is this your voice, Mr. Patterson?" The kid, he looked suspicious," Patterson stammered, his face now a blotchy, unhealthy shade of red. "Suspicious?" Agent Chen pressed, her eyebrows arching in a look of polite, but deadly, disbelief. "In what way, exactly, was he suspicious? Did he make any threats? Did he display any aggressive behavior?" Patterson swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. "Well, no, not exactly, but—" Agent Chen pressed the play button again. The recorder now played back the comments about people like you, the cruel jokes about more security guards, the sneering, dismissive tone. With each recorded sentence, Patterson seemed to sink deeper and deeper into his chair, as if the weight of his own ugly words was physically crushing him. "Mr. Patterson," Agent Chen continued, her voice steady, relentless, "the young man you so publicly, and so cruelly, humiliated yesterday is named Kevin Williams. He is the son of Colonel James Williams, a decorated American war hero who was killed in the line of duty just 6 months ago. Kevin is a legally emancipated minor, and as such, he has a constitutional right to be treated with dignity and respect in any and all commercial establishments in this country." Morrison let out a low, strangled curse from across the room. Patterson felt as if the floor had disappeared from beneath his feet, as if he were in a free fall. "Colonel Williams," he stammered, his mind struggling to process the information. But the boy didn't say, why should he have to?" Agent Chen interrupted, her voice now sharp, cutting. "Does a 15-year-old boy have to announce the military record of his deceased, heroic father in order to receive basic, common courtesy from you?" Agent Chen opened a manila envelope and spread a series of glossy, higher-resolution photographs. Across the glass countertop, they were pictures of James Williams receiving medals from a 4-star general, shaking hands with a president in the Oval Office, standing with his unit in the dusty, war-torn landscape of Afghanistan. Colonel Williams served this country for 23 years, Agent Chen said, her voice now a low, dangerous murmur. He served in 3 combat tours. He completed dozens of classified high-risk missions. He died saving the lives of innocent civilians in an international humanitarian operation. She paused, her gaze locking onto Patterson's, a look of such profound, undisguised contempt that it made him flinch. And you mocked his son, because he looked suspicious to you. Thompson, the other wealthy customer, who had just arrived to pick up a special order, witnessed the scene in a growing, horrified silence. His own face was now as pale as paper. Asterisk. Agent Chen continued, her voice relentless, a surgeon systematically dissecting a diseased patient. Kevin recorded the entire interaction yesterday. He used a legal protection app that he installed on his phone after facing repeated, and similar, incidents of discrimination since his father's death. He has the legal right, Mr. Patterson, to sue this establishment, and you personally, for discrimination based on age, race, and appearance. Patterson, desperate, tried one last pathetic defense. Agent Chen, it was all just a misunderstanding. If we had known who he was. Exactly. Agent Chen cut him off, her voice now like a whip crack. If you had known who he was, not who he is. A person's character, Mr. Patterson, their right to be treated with basic human dignity, does not change based on their parents' profession or the size of their bank account. Agent Chen pulled out another set of documents from her briefcase. Kevin Williams, she read, her voice clear and precise, has a tested IQ of 142. He has a perfect 4.0 grade point average, and he has already been accepted, on full academic scholarships, to 3 different prestigious universities. He is also a certified lifeguard, and has, on 2 separate occasions, saved the lives of 2 people from drowning, while volunteering at the local community pool. Each new fact was like a physical slap in Patterson's face. The suspicious, ignorant boy he had so gleefully humiliated was more qualified, more educated, and had contributed more to society than most of his wealthy adult clients. Furthermore, Agent Chen continued, her voice now a low, ominous rumble. Our preliminary investigation has revealed that this establishment has a long-standing and undocumented practice of charging different prices for the same services, based on the perceived wealth and social status of its customers. That, Mr. Patterson, is a direct violation of federal trade regulations. Morrison, the lawyer, tried to hide behind a bookcase, but Agent Chen had already noticed him. Mr. Morrison, correct, she said, her voice sharp. You are an attorney, an officer of the court, and you were present during this entire incident of documented discrimination. In fact, you actively encouraged the behavior. Morrison opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water, no sound coming out. Agent Chen closed her folder with a sharp, definitive sound that echoed in the silent, tense store. Arsenal Premium, she announced, her voice now a formal, official declaration, is under a full federal investigation. Your licenses will be reviewed, and there is a very high probability of a temporary, and possibly permanent, suspension of your operations. Patterson slumped in his chair, a broken, defeated man. 15 years. 15 years of carefully building his business, his reputation, his exclusive, private world, and it was all falling apart because of a few short minutes of gratuitous, thoughtless cruelty against a teenager. Agent Chen Patterson pleaded, his voice a hoarse, desperate whisper. Please, can't there be some way to work this out? I can compensate the boy. I can compensate him. Agent Chen laughed, a short, cold, humorless sound. Mr. Patterson, Kevin Williams doesn't want your money. He wants justice. And justice, she added, her eyes as hard and as cold as the steel of the guns that surrounded them, is exactly what he is going to get. The bell on the door chimed softly, and Kevin Williams walked in. He was wearing the same simple, clean clothes as the day before, but now, with Agent Chen at his side, with the truth revealed, with the balance of power completely and irrevocably shifted, his presence carried a completely different weight. Patterson looked at Kevin with new eyes. He no longer saw a suspicious, out-of-place kid. He saw the son of an American hero. He saw a brilliant, courageous young man who he had, cruelly and stupidly, judged by nothing more than the color of his skin and the quality of his clothes. Kevin, Agent Chen said, her voice now full of a quiet, profound respect. Do you need anything else from these gentlemen for your report? Kevin looked directly at Patterson, his gaze steady, his expression not one of triumph, but of a quiet, sad, and profound resolution. No, Agent Chen, he said, his voice clear and firm. I think the message has been conveyed. Thompson, Morrison, and Patterson remained silent, finally, and painfully, understanding that they had seriously, catastrophically, underestimated not only Kevin Williams, but the very real, and very severe, consequences of their own, deeply ingrained, prejudices. Outside, another dark Fedra sedan pulled up to the curb, carrying a team of additional investigators. Arsenal Premium was about to discover that discriminating against the son of an American hero had ramifications that extended far, far beyond their own small, prejudiced, and now doomed world, and Kevin Williams, at 15 years old, had just proven, to himself, and to the world, that dignity, and honor, and respect, are not privileges to be granted or withheld based on appearances. They are fundamental, inalienable rights, and he was willing to defend them with the very same courage, the very same strategic intelligence, that his father had shown on the battlefields of a world away. 3 months after the federal investigation began, the heavy glass doors of Arsenal Premium were closed for good, a permanently closed sign taped unceremoniously to the inside. Rick Patterson had lost not only his federal license to sell firearms, but he was also facing a massive tax audit that had uncovered a series of financial irregularities dating back 5 long years. His mortgaged home, his personal savings, his entire carefully constructed world, had evaporated in a storm of legal fees and crippling federal fines. Morrison, the lawyer, had had his law license suspended for 6 months by the State Bar Association, after they had discovered his active and enthusiastic involvement in the documented incident of discrimination. His most important and most lucrative clients had quietly migrated to other, less controversial law firms, leaving him to work on small, insignificant cases, a desperate, and largely unsuccessful, attempt to rebuild his ruined reputation. Thompson, the wealthy businessman, had seen his lucrative government contracts, the very lifeblood of his company, cancelled, one by one, when the federal investigation had revealed that his own company also engaged in a pattern of systematic and illegal hiring discrimination. The man who had prided himself on keeping his world select had discovered, to his horror, that his own exclusive, prejudiced practices had become his biggest and most public business nightmare. Kevin Williams, on the other hand, had turned the ugly, painful experience into something much bigger, much more powerful, than a simple, personal revenge. With the unwavering support of Captain Rodriguez, and a growing network of other military veterans and civil rights lawyers, he had created the Colonel James Williams Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to combating discrimination against minority youth in commercial establishments. The foundation offered free legal assistance for young people who had faced similar cases of discrimination. It developed and distributed educational materials on civil rights for teenagers, and it created a series of mentoring programs connecting at-risk youth with retired military veterans, men and women who understood the true meaning of honor, of discipline, of respect. In just 3 short months, the organization had already successfully sued 12 different establishments for discriminatory practices, and had achieved significant, lasting reforms in the customer service policies of more than 50 other companies. Kevin, as his father had hoped, had been accepted into the prestigious United States Military Academy at West Point on a full academic merit scholarship. He was following in his father's footsteps, but he was also forging his own unique path of service, a path that was now defined by a deeply personal and deeply passionate mission to ensure that other young people would not have to face the same kind of ugly, soul-crushing prejudice that he had experienced during the Foundation's official opening ceremony, which was held in the packed auditorium of the local university. More than 300 people were in attendance. There were 4-star generals, decorated veterans, local and state officials, and most importantly, dozens of young people from all different backgrounds who had faced similar painful experiences of discrimination. My father always taught me that true strength isn't about fighting back with anger, Kevin told the emotional and completely silent audience, his voice clear and strong, resonating with a wisdom that was far beyond his years. It's about having the courage and the vision to turn a moment of injustice into a lifetime of positive change. When those men humiliated me in that store, they didn't know it, but they were planting the seed for something much bigger, much more powerful, than their own ignorance. In the front row of the audience, Sarah Williams watched her son, her eyes filled with tears of profound and overwhelming pride. At her side, Captain Rodriguez whispered, his own voice thick with emotion, "James would be so proud, Sarah, so proud." The boy didn't just honor his father's memory, he multiplied his legacy. The final and most poignant irony came a few weeks later when Rick Patterson, now desperate for work, tried to get a job at a large chain sporting goods store. The manager, a sharp, intelligent young black man in his late 20s, recognized his name during the interview. "Mr. Patterson, isn't it?" the young man said, his expression polite but firm. "I've read about your situation at Arsenal Premium." He paused, looking down at Patterson's resume. "Unfortunately, Mr. Patterson, it is our strict company policy not to hire any individuals with a documented history of discrimination. I do hope you understand." Patterson left the interview understanding, for the first time in his entire privileged life, how his own actions, his own prejudices, had created the very barriers he was now facing. The humiliation he had so casually, so cruelly, inflicted on Kevin had come back to him, multiplied, but this time, it was accompanied by a hard and bitter lesson that he would carry with him for the rest of his life. Kevin had learned something that not all military handbooks can teach. He had learned that sometimes the most complete and most satisfying victory is not in destroying your enemy, but in transforming the entire battlefield. He had not only defended his own dignity, he had created a system, a foundation, a legacy, to protect the dignity of everyone who would come after him. 2 years later, when Kevin graduated, at the top of his class, as a second lieutenant from West Point, Rick Patterson watched the ceremony on a small, flickering television in his cramped, rented apartment. The young man he had so arrogantly, so foolishly, dismissed as a suspicious kid, now appeared on the screen, saluting generals, being praised for his exceptional academic merit, his leadership, his character, and in that moment, Patterson finally, truly, understood. He understood that he had not only judged wrongly, but that he had wasted a precious and fleeting opportunity to know someone extraordinary, simply because his own prejudices, his own fears, his own insecurities, were greater than his humanity. Kevin's true revenge was not the destruction of Rick Patterson, it was the building of a legacy that would ensure that future generations of young people would not have to face the same kind of disrespect, the same kind of casual cruelty. He had turned 3 short, painful minutes of humiliation into decades of positive, lasting change. The lesson that Kevin Williams taught the world transcends issues of race, of age, of social class. It is a universal lesson. When we face injustice, we can choose to respond with bitterness, with anger, with a desire for revenge, or we can choose to build. We can choose to build bridges to a more just, a more compassionate, a more understanding world. Kevin chose to build, and in the process, he not only honored his father's memory, but he redefined what it truly means to turn pain into purpose.